right, which Fujifilm sensor is the best? Well, let's define a couple of things. Number one, it doesn't really matter. What matters is taking good quality photographs. So after we do all this kind of nerdy looking into what the sensors are doing, it doesn't matter. You could take great pictures with any of them. That's number one. Number two, it's not a fair comparison because I don't have X-Trans 1. That's the only sensor that I haven't picked up yet, but I just needed to make this video. I've been sitting on it. So let me just push this one out and hopefully down the road, I'll get send me an X-Trans 1 sensor, huh? Who's got an X-Trans 1 camera? Any Fujifilm fans know that there's something special about the sensors, especially like we've been talking about recently, some of the older ones, like this Fujifilm X70, which has an X-Trans 2 sensor. And it's funny, I've watched some other videos on these cameras and everyone's kind of saying the same thing, like the older sensors are better than the newer sensors and that the cameras that are older have more quality. So I wanted to dive deeper and see what really is the difference. Now, by the way, some of the stuff we find might not, the results might not be because of the sensor. The camera processor is also involved. And also, as you'll see later, so does your raw editing program or what program you're looking at the files in. Yeah. All right, moving on. Okay, next, the X-Trans 3 sensor, which is my favorite, of course, biased because my channel started with the X-T20. This has the X-Trans 3 sensor. It's 24 megapixels. It's beautiful. The images are so nice that come out of these cameras. And the X-T2, which is my rugged version of my X-T20. I have too many cameras. And the newest sensor, the 26 megapixel X-Trans 4 sensor. The X-T3 has it, X-T4. All the new cameras that Fujifilm has come out with the last 2 years have this sensor. Now, once I started shooting with the Fujifilm X70, I was like, something's different about this camera. The images look kind of filmy and old and nostalgic, and I love it. So I wanted to figure out what was going on. So I actually went out with the X-T3 and this one and put the settings the same and started taking photographs. What I was noticing was the X-T3 images were always a little cooler and the X70 were always a little warmer, even if all the settings were the same. Quality-wise, 16 megapixels versus 26, you really can't tell the difference unless you're really pixel peeping. Now, sometimes I can't tell them apart. The only way I could tell them apart is, again, that warm filmic look. So here, if you notice, the one on the left here, depends what screen you're looking at, but I'm looking at them here. This right here, this garage back here, and the van are a little whiter. But look at detail. Detail-wise, in these two, even if I zoom in on the vans here, they both have a lot of detail. So I was super surprised by 16 megapixels versus 26, that really, when you're looking at the photograph, you can't notice that much. I also noticed that blues were a little different. No matter what film simulation I use, it seems like blues were rendered differently on the older cameras. With the X-T2 and X-T3, blues were more accurate. So when I'm looking at this Jeep, it looks, in real life, it looks more like what the X-T3 is giving you. And the X70, this X-Trans 2 sensor, is giving you whatever it wants, like some weird blue. The Jeep didn't look like this at all, but I didn't care because the camera was giving you kind of like a flavor or a feel. And we've talked about that before. Are you going for color accurate images that are perfect and sharp and that's reality? Or it's art. You're looking for compositions and shapes and shadows. So a muddy yellow piss color doesn't really matter that much. So after walking around and being like, oh, these are so different, I didn't feel fulfilled. So I came back here to the studio and I was kind of like, let me do more control tests. And so I set up a light and I tried to set up the cameras, the 3 cameras, in a more controlled environment. So here's what we got. The first thing I did was I'm like, let me see what the cameras think colors are. And so I went into each camera and dialed in a Kelvin temperature. This is basically telling your camera, hey, I'm in daylight or I'm in tungsten light. So 5600 is the light temperature that I'm using here. This is the light I use, the one that's on my face. And I told each camera, give me 5600. And here's what they did. So the X-T3, X-T2, and X-70 all gave slightly different renditions, all settings the same. So here's what I noticed, and this is going to be a reoccurring theme. The X-Trans 2 sensor, the oldest sensor, definitely gives warmer caramel images, okay, at the same temperatures as the other ones. If you notice, the X-T2 also is slightly warmer than the X-T3. And what I found is the X-T3 gives the most color accurate, the thing that's closest to reality. So the X-T3 here at 5600 is doing, quote, the best job. But again, there is no real answer of what the best is. The other thing I noticed is the X-70s, two more things. One, reds are redder than red. And colors are punchier. Like the colors just are a little bit more extreme. You could really tell in the reds. If you look at Superman's Reds cape, you know, it looks like the X-70 is the reddest, and then the X-T2, boy, Fujifilm reds are so nice, aren't they? And the last thing I noticed is that the X-T3, with all the settings the same, the contrast was the least. The X-70, the oldest sensor, had the most contrast, and the X-T3 toned everything down. Colors were less extreme, and contrast was less extreme. And it seems like the X-T2 is like a middle ground. Of course, this is years here. This is years between all these sensors. So that was my first test. But you notice they're a little bit more equal now, color-wise. You could see in the orange and the banana, the yellows look the same. SOOCs looks the same. But again, the reds. So check out the reds are very red in the X-70. They're very deep. And compare them to the X-T3. So if we go like this, see the X-T3's red. And then we have the X-T2's red. See those two there? And then the X-70 red. And again, look at the contrast. We got the same thing going on here. The X-70 gives you a little bit more punch, which could be straight out of camera more attractive to us. You know, by the way, when they sell TVs in Best Buy and they put them all up there, they put them on max brightness, they put them on vivid color, and they also increase the contrast. We are attracted to like a punch in the image. And so that's why some people may like the X-70 and the X-Trans 2 sensor, the older one. It could just be a matter of adding contrast and color, by the way. All right, for the next one, I set a custom white balance. And so a custom white balance is I took a gray card and told each camera, this is white. Don't do auto white, do my white. And here you notice they're very similar. They even get even more similar. Same kind of thing going on here. The oldest camera, X-Trans 2, is the most contrasty and also has the most punch in those reds. And one other thing I started noticing too is the blues are a little bit more baby blue than deeper blue. If you notice this sort of ice sculpture thing here on Superman, notice how the X-T2's blue compares to the X-70's X-Trans 2 sensor's blue. Okay, so that there is a difference in some of the blues, like the Jeep we saw earlier. However, in the X-T2 and X-T3, they're like almost identical. Now, after the custom white balance, I did a color checker passport. This is when you take a picture of the color checker and software picks the color. Now, before you freak out, these are not Fuji colors, as you can see from Superman's cape. Look, Fuji red, software red, okay? So the color checker passport is, allows you to get accurate colors. And now it's the same story. The X-70's colors are just a little punchier, and so is the contrast. By the way, with the color checker passport, you have to use the raw files. I use the JPEGs for most of these tests just to see what the cameras are spitting out. I do use raw in some of the examples coming up, but this one you have to use raw because the program that picks the custom colors needs a raw file. Now, what about the film simulations? Because a lot of them, they have a lot of the same film simulations. So what are the film simulations doing? So I used my custom white balance again. These are all JPEGs. What do they look like? So let's start with the standard Provia. This is kind of like the bread and butter of Fujifilm. Anyone starting out, Provia is considered standard. It's even called standard in the cameras. So what do they look like? Again, the same story. It looks to me like the X-Trans 2 seems to be the punchiest. In second place, X-T2 with a little bit of punch and then a little bit of softness here. A little bit of a less contrast is the X-T3, which is the X-Trans 4 sensor. The colors to me look very, very similar. Astia, which Astia, by the way, a lot of people use for portraits. It's good for skin tones. Again, baby blue versus darker blue. And the reds seem to be a little bit, the three seem to be a little more different this time. I'm looking at the X-T3 versus the X-T2 here. And it looks like in Astia, the X-T3 is a little bit more orange red. And Astia in the X-T2 here is a little bit more red. And then when we look at Mr. Old Guy here, it's kind of like red, saturated red, a little lighter. So again, these are slight differences, but they're good to know this difference because Astia is usually used for skin tones. So if you're seeing a difference between your different camera ages on skin tones, it could be because Astia is a little bit different with the reds. I didn't have time to get someone with skin. Bad excuse. Velvia, oh my gosh. Velvia on steroids is that X-Trans 2 sensor, the old one. I mean, look how hyper red everything is. It's crazy. And what's funny is it looks like here, the X-Trans 4, the newest sensor, to me looks like it's a little bit more red. Like they added some more red in the Velvia than X-T2. You see how the X-T2 seems a little less red? Again, this all depends what monitor you're looking at, or if you're looking at this on a phone or something, I don't know. Now, classic chrome, I never loved classic chrome on my X-T3, X-T2, but I liked it on the X70. I didn't know why, and I think I know why now. It's because there's a little bit more color in the X-Trans 2 sensor, the older sensor. There's a little bit more punch. Look at the red in the cape now of the X-Trans 4 versus the X-Trans 2. So there's a little bit more red. And I sometimes give my classic chrome a +1 or a +2 color. And so I'm getting things I like from the older cameras. And I'm like, oh, their classic chrome used to be better. No, overall, the older sensor is adding punch and adding saturation, which is something you could do in the X-T3. You could just add +1 shadow, +2 color, and you should start getting closer to the older sensors, give it more flavor. We'll talk about that in a second, how you can make the newer cameras kind of look like the older sensor. Who do we have next? Pro Neg High, another one that I ignored on the newer cameras, but I kind of liked in the older camera. Pro Neg High, notice the red is kind of normal, like it's Provia-like, but in the newer cameras, they really toned down Pro Neg High. And in Pro Neg Standard is even flatter. If you notice, look at the reds compared X-T3 to the X70. Black and white, I didn't notice any difference between their black and white, and you probably wouldn't. And one thing is the newer cameras have Acros film simulation, but for some reason the X70's Acros is broken. It's like brown or something. I don't know what's going on there. Stupid old cameras. All right, ISO performance. Now, by the way, before we move on, give this a thumbs up if you like it so far. It was a lot of work. Thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And also, let's talk about ISO performance. So let's look at them all, just single camera so you can get a sense of what the cameras are doing, and then we'll compare. So the ISO performance of the X-T3 is pretty good. Pretty much all these sensors are good to about 1600 and 3200. So if you notice, the X-T3 looks good at 1600, good detail. This is really zoomed in, by the way, on the image. There's 3200. And then once I completely stay away from anything, I try to stay away from 3200 and 64 on most of the cameras. I usually shoot 1600 and below because I like a little bit of a cleaner image. I mean, you're still getting really good images. They're not breaking apart. Let's just say that. Now the X-Trans 3 sensor, which is the X-T2, believe it or not, is a better performer with ISO. Here's 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, and 6400. Not bad, not bad. So let's look at the X-T3 and the X-T2. This is kind of a known thing if you look at reviews between the two. But believe it or not, the X-T2 is the older camera is a better ISO performer than the X-T3. So if you notice, here's at 1600. So the X-T2, which is this one, has a little less grain. And at 3200, look at the X-T2 is a little cleaner. Now, I did this test. I was like blown away by this because to me, the X-T2 looks so much cleaner than the X-T3. And I'm kind of like, it can't be that much cleaner. So I actually repeated the test just using the raw files. I wanted to check the raw files between the two. 1600. If you look at 1600 between the two, things are a little closer now. Things are a little closer. Look, 1600. And in this example, it even looks like the X-T3 is slightly better. Let's go to 3200, X-T2, X-T3. Again, it looks like the X-T3 is doing just a little better. I mean, we're kind of nitpicking here. Let's look at his leg. It's hard to tell, right, with the raw. And then 64, I wanted to see 64. Let's check him out. And here, it looks like the X-T3 might have more noise, but the X-T3 has slightly more megapixels. So now megapixels are kicking in and making it look sharper. Like, look at the belt. We're so pixel peeping right now, it doesn't even matter. But my point is, I suspect that even though both cameras were set for JPEG -4 noise reduction, I made sure the camera didn't do any noise reduction. I feel that the X-T2's -4 noise reduction is actually reducing more noise. So from your JPEGs on the X-Trans 3 sensor, which is the X-T2, the older camera, you're going to get cleaner JPEGs, even though you're using -4 noise reduction, okay? And by the way, if you haven't been on this channel, we always say turn your noise reduction down because you're going to get nicer images. Sometimes adding noise reduction gives you weird results. So that's one thing I suggest, to keep it at -2, -3, -4. Now, what about the X70? Well, the X70 has 60 megapixels. And usually when you have less, did I say 60? 16 megapixels. And usually when you have more megapixels, you get worse noise performance. And this guy has less megapixels. And here's what we're seeing. We're seeing, 200, 400, 800. It has good noise, it's good noise performance. All right, let's compare the high ISOs of all three. X-T3, X-T2, X70, these are all JPEGs. X-T3 was the worst performer, the newest sensor. But again, I suspect that this might be a processor thing going on. Because when I look at the RAWs, and I also look at the RAWs, and I did this also in Capture One, I didn't just do Lightroom. It seems like they're more equal, the RAW files, in noise. And the JPEGs seem to be a little bit more different. So take that with whatever grain of saltness you want to. See, when I'm looking at the raw files here, here's the X-T3, X-T2. It's a little harder to tell the difference. Look at the pot there. Can't really tell a difference. And if you're looking at the X70, this is 6400. You can't really tell the difference with the raw files. So keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to image quality, they all take fantastic images. And again, you could take sucky photos with a lot of megapixels. But I'm starting to lean more towards a middle ground of megapixels or lower. I'm starting to be annoyed by images that are high megapixel because I find that I'm toning them down. They're just way too sharp. Especially if you're doing portraiture, if you're doing like street scenes, they don't need to be so hyper sharp. With that said, there isn't much difference between 16, 24, and 26. I thought you would see more of a difference. But even if you go in way deep, like look at this for best versus best, X-T3 versus X-T2, You know, like this one's supposed to be sharper. I really can't even tell the difference. Let's look at Hulk's back foot here, the wrinkles. I mean, maybe slightly sharper, but I mean, we're going like 400%. And then if I compare the X-T2's 24 megapixels to 16, you can't tell the difference. I mean, if you print these, you can't tell the difference. If they're on a phone, you can't tell the difference. If I'm zooming in, I can't really tell the difference. So megapixels don't really matter in the 3. This is taken with the 16 megapixel X70 and it's super sharp. You could see everything there. This is the X-T3. You know, you got detail in the city. You got great accurate colors if that's what you want. Maybe go with the X-T3 if you want the most detail, although we can't really tell the difference. But you want more color accuracy. The X-Trans 4 sensor, the newest one, will give you that. This is the X-T20, which that has the X-Trans 3 sensor, and the colors that come out of it are great. It's sharp. The images are really sharp. I love that. And again, I've been having fun with the weirdness of the X70. This one gives strange, warmer caramel colors. So, you know, if you want something with more flavor straight out of camera, then the X-Trans 2 sensor might be for you, the older cameras. Now, so here's a conclusion of what I found. I found that the X-T3 overall was the slightly more detailed. The white balances were more cooler and more color accurate. There was definitely less contrast. It was a flatter image overall. And the ISO in the JPEGs is going to be worse than your X-T2. Although in the RAW, I really like zooming in and I can't tell the difference. So the X-Trans 3 sensor, which is the second one the X-T2 has, this one's a great middle ground. I found this was a good middle ground in contrast and color. The auto white balance is more like the X-T3, but not so clean and white and crisp. There's medium contrast, and it seems to be the best at high ISOs. Now, what about the X-Trans 2, the oldest sensors? Should you go out and buy the oldest cameras? Well, I found they're more film-like at a camera, meaning like if you put it on auto white balance or sunlight, you're going to be getting colors that are wrong, but they look nice. Your auto white balances are going to be warmer. Your images are going to be more contrasty. Colors are less accurate, which it could be a good thing. The reds are the deepest of all the reds, so your film simulations are different. And at high ISOs, it does pretty good. So what if you want your newest X-T4, X Pro 3 to look more like the old cameras? Well, you have to desaturate your blues slightly, warm up the photo if necessary, add a little bit of contrast, +1 or so, and in the computer, just reduce the clarity a little bit to make them more film-like. You can also add a curve to make your images very film-like. But overall, again, none of this matters because, we want to take good photographs. So, were there any surprises in this video, things you learned? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.